And it's a great pleasure to be here. So thank you to Dan and Kelly and everybody here at the LaGrua Center. And thank you all for coming out tonight to see the program. This is going to be different, a little bit different than how I've done this program in the past. I've given plenty of programs just on the history of the museum, and I could talk to you till dawn just about the cool things about Slater Museum. But what I really wanted to focus on too was not just the history, but the future of the museum. Because right now we are on a very exciting course with the museum. We have been unfortunately closed for all of 2022 because of a major roof restoration that we didn't want to do. We had to do it. Just very, very quickly here. I'm sure many of you probably put a roof on a house before, right? So it's one of those things called building maintenance that is very necessary to have a building that will keep everything inside safe. And slate roofs, which is what's on top of Slater right now, slate roofs could last anywhere from 100 to 150 years, depending on your climate. We're at 135, so we are right in that sweet spot, and we had to do it. This was something that's been talked about for several years now, and we decided to pull the trigger and do what needed to be done. So unfortunately, it's been disruptive to our opening schedule because for the past 2 years, we had to be closed because of the pandemic, and we were open partially in 2021, only to have to close again for the roof restoration. So my time as director has been sort of disjointed in the sense that we haven't really been open. I haven't really enjoyed yet being open and welcoming people to the museum to do what we do best. So I'm really looking forward to just being open. I don't want to redo any more museums after this is all said and done. It's been quite a journey, and I have learned a lot throughout the process. I've been there at the museum almost 6 years. This summer will be my 6th year there, and I've been in the director role almost a couple of years now. So I want to talk to you a little bit about the history of this great building here. And just by a show of hands, do we have any alums of NFA? All right, see, you could probably give this program, so I might have to call you up for some assistance maybe. And raise your hand again. If you've been in Slater Museum before. Raise your hand if you've been. Wow, okay. Strange, I don't remember it. No, I'm just kidding. We've been closed, remember? We've been closed for a while. That's great. I'm glad to see there's a lot of familiarity here because if you've been to the museum within the past 5 to 10 years, let's say, when you come back, it's going to look totally different. And I say that in a good way because most everything that's been on display hasn't been updated actually in about 12 years. And that's a long time in museum world. So while we've been shut down due to the roof restoration, we took this as an opportunity to really look at the museum holistically to see what could be improved, what needs to be changed. And as a director, I've had to really look critically at everything within the museum, whether it's a text panel or a label or something that's on display, and go, how could we improve this? Is there anything that we could do that might improve this for the visitor experience? And that's how I operate. I'm a big picture guy, so I like looking at the forest and seeing what trees are doing just fine, what trees need to be pruned, and some trees need to be uprooted and replanted with some brand new trees that are going to grow into beautiful, beautiful trees. So you're going to get an exclusive behind-the-scenes look, because I got a lot of pictures of what's going on in the galleries. And since most all of you have been in there, I think you'll get really excited to see what we got. And if no one throws any tomatoes, I know that we're doing a good job. Now, the building itself is so special because it's an antique. It's 135 years old, over 135 years old now. And it's really the masterpiece of architect Stephen C. Earle. Stephen Earle is a Worcester, Massachusetts-based architect, and in his heyday, he probably built most all of the iconic buildings you might be familiar with in Worcester, Massachusetts, and I'll have a few examples of what some of them are. He was highly prolific in the Richardsonian Romanesque school of architecture, and that's what Slater Museum belongs to. So that's a Jeopardy term. So if you ever want to know the architecture of the museum, Romanesque revival to be exact. Some of Stephen Earle's works here you might have seen before. Anybody recognize any of these buildings? Yeah, if you've been through Worcester or through Norwich, Connecticut, you probably have seen some of them. This right here is right across the street from Slater Museum. This is Park Congregational Church. That's right across the street on Chelsea Parade. That's one of Stephen Earle's buildings. Anybody recognize this building next to it here? It is the Worcester Art Museum, yes. If you go by the Worcester Art Museum now, you're not going to see this. The it's sort of covered by a newer building, but you can still see the inside. You can still see some of the inside details. Anybody recognize these two buildings up here? This one here is Union Congregational Church. That's up in Worcester, Massachusetts. And this is Boynton Hall at Worcester Polytechnic Institute, also in Worcester. And I show these buildings specifically because Stephen Earle was so incredibly skilled and intelligent when it came to architectural design that he liked blending different designs of architecture into one building, whether it was taking the Romanesque template and blending either Gothic style or just anything, really. And a number of these buildings just exhibit those different details. I mean, he almost looks like he was going for like a Notre Dame type design with this church. This is another one of his buildings. Anybody recognize this one? Yeah, that's in Norwich. That's the Flatiron Building, also known as the Carroll Building. That's another one of Stephen Earle's buildings. He designed several buildings in Norwich between Slater Museum, Park Congregational, this building, and he also designed the home of what was Mariana Hubbard Slater's house. It's now the Bishop's House of the Diocese of Norwich on Broadway. That's another one of his designs. Now, Slater Museum exists because of the philanthropy and the vision that was set forth by this family that you see here. The Slater family was by far the most prominent family in Norwich, and at the height of his prominence, John Fox Slater over here was the wealthiest man in Norwich, and it wasn't even close. He had an income exceeding $100,000 a year, and this would have been around the time of the Civil War. We're talking millions and millions of dollars. And his son, William Slater, over here, graduates from NFA in 1875. These two men are so deeply connected to the community that without them, the community would not look anything like it does today. John Fox Slater was an original corporator of NFA. There were about 37 of them that established the school. And when John Fox Slater passes away in 1882, his son William wanted to memorialize his father with a gift to NFA. You probably know this already, but there's some nuance to it that you might find interesting. William Slater specifically wanted this building to be a literal memorial to his father and to his family. That's why we're called Slater Memorial Museum. He didn't want it to be called the William Slater Art Museum or anything like that. No, this was meant to be a memorial to his family. And so we have both of these men to thank for what was really such a forward-thinking vision for the time. Because how many high schools in America actually have a museum on their campus? Anybody know the answer? Two high schools. Norwich Free Academy. What's the other one? Anybody know? I think someone said it. Phillips Academy, Andover, Massachusetts. Yep, that's the only other high school in America that has a museum. That alone makes this setting so unique. And I wasn't born and raised in Norwich, but I tell you, every time I walk into that building and I see these two men framed in gold looking at me, it sets a tone. It sets a really important tone. And anybody that went to NFA knows how important it is and knows how important this resource is to the community. It wasn't just them, though. This was a collaborative effort that that set forth a vision for this museum. And it would not be complete without mentioning Dr. Robert Porter Keep, who was appointed NFA's head of school in 1885. This was right in the middle of the construction of the building. The building would be finished in 1886. And the building was designed very specifically as an Athenaeum. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means it does three things. Anybody know what those three things are? It's supposed to uplift a person's mind, body, and spirit. Very simple. And the building still does that to this day. A person's spirit is uplifted within the auditorium of the museum with musical performance. A person's mind was uplifted in one of the museum galleries that was the library with information and wisdom. And the uplifting of the body was supposed to happen in the museum galleries that now house the plaster casts. Those galleries almost became a gymnasium. But that plan changed. And it changed because of this man, Dr. Robert Porter Keep. His obituary, which I just read through again today, referred to him as the greatest Greek scholar of our lifetime. And that's exactly what he was. He was a scholar of classics, and he was a special envoy in Piraeus, Greece for many, many years. He worked in the official capacity of the State Department. So that's his background. That's his background as a scholar of classical civilization. And Dr. Robert Porter Keep was instrumental to say, instead of a gymnasium, now hear me out, because you might like this idea. Instead of a gymnasium, how about installing a body of artwork? And that's exactly what happened. And that was all thanks to his vision. This is an image right around, I think, 1890, this image was taken. So this was not too long after the museum opened up. And it was such an impressive structure, not to take away from the rest of campus here, but in terms of visual presence, it kind of dominates the campus. It's the tallest building, it's the most imposing. This right here is the original NFA building. It does not exist anymore. It was torn down around 1910 or so, now around 1910, 1911, and it's replaced with now the current Tyrrell building. But this is sort of what it would have looked like way back when, early 1900s. I should have said before, if anyone has any questions, any quick questions about anything we're going over, happy to answer them, but we'll have an opportunity for question and answers at the very end as well. Here's some great images to show you. This is the library of campus here. Now it's going to be it's exhibition space within the museum. And this also was very important because the first man to be Slater's curator also served as the head librarian as well. I'm going to talk about him in just a moment too. But all those stacks of books were all along the walls here. In fact, I still have that bust. So you'll see a lot of the museum's collection that's still on display. It's really quite fascinating. Here's some other shots of the library. This is looking towards the big fireplace. The door that you walk in is off to the side here. And for the most part, the layout of these rooms are unchanged. They're totally unchanged. So it's nice that the original detailing of the building was really well preserved throughout all this time. Here's a period shot of the auditorium here, and all these portraits are still there, not in the room, but they're still in the museum. They have changed positions a lot of times over the years. Every now and then I'll uncover a new photograph, and I see, oh, I never knew that portrait hung on this wall before. Oh, that's always very interesting. And tradition is very important to Slater Museum and to NFA as a whole. This right here is a shot circa 1890s or so of some of the first art students to draw and sketch in the cast gallery. Who's sketched? Any art students in here? Anyone? Yeah. So this is a time-honored tradition that has existed ever since the founding of the Norwich Art School in 1890. Fashion certainly has changed over the years, but not much else has changed in terms of just the literal application of studying a figure and sketching from that figure. And all of these have changed positions. None of these casts are in the same positions as they are here. Here's another shot of some art students. This right here is the entrance. If you've ever come through the gift shop counter is right here now. Yep, and then these doors take you into the old hall. That takes you into the Sears Gallery, which was the library space. Every room within the museum, if it wasn't gallery space, it was studio space for art students. And since the founding of the art school in 1890, the art school was always based within the museum building for decades and decades. And over the years, as the campus grew, as the campus changed, a number of other buildings get built to, again, serve that purpose. But we still have that very close symbiotic relationship with the art school to this day. This right here is a shot of what is now our administrative offices. So my office is like right behind the camera here. But before then, it was all wide open studio space. Here's another great shot. Some young ladies doing their sketching. This man right here is quite instrumental. This is Slater Museum's first curator, Henry Watson Kent. He was appointed curator in 1888, and he remained there for about 12 years until he went back to New York to become a librarian for the Grolier Club in New York City. Henry Watson Kent was a trained librarian. He went to Columbia. He went to library school at Columbia, and he was really quite an ideal fit for this job. He actually went to NFA as an exchange student from Boston. That's where he originally had come from. And as Slater's first curator, I think my job's been sort of difficult these past 2 years, but I can't even imagine what his job could have been, because what do you do with this brand new museum? He didn't really have a lot of other models or inspiration to go by, so he didn't necessarily have to make it up as he went, but he had to set the first set of standards for how the museum was going to run. Back then in 1888, there was no such thing as museum studies programs. There was no such thing as that. We had museums, but there weren't any professional programs that could train people to run them. Library school was a fairly close fit. And Henry Watson Kent took his job very seriously. And what I mean by that is he would travel to different museums across the country. He even traveled all throughout Europe to see how museums were run in different countries and in different states. He took such detailed notes. We have whole volumes and scrapbooks of his journey and he wrote down everything from how pictures were displayed to whether or not there was a turnstile counting the number of people entering in the building. And he took everything that he saw and applied it in some way, shape, or form to Slater's operations. And I always thought that was so progressive and forward-thinking of him, because he could have made everything up. He could have just sat in a room and made it up. But no, he went out into the world and took inspiration where he could find it. And I try to operate that way too. It's really important to see what other organizations like you are doing, because that's how we best learn. That's really how we best learn, and that's how we can really improve the way we do business. So, very, very important man. Before he died, he ended up publishing a memoir called What I Am Pleased to Call My Education. It was published around 1946, 1947 or so. And not for nothing, it's just a really interesting read. If you ever come across a copy of it, you might consider picking it up or borrowing it from a library. And he really gets, it's an autobiography, but it's more or less his autobiography on his career and how he got to where he was. Slater Museum received an expansion in 1906 with a gift from Colonel Charles Converse. Charles Converse was a firearms magnate in Norwich. He was a principal owner of the Hopkins and Allen Firearm Manufacturing Company in downtown Norwich. And with a big gift to NFA, Converse donated the money to build what became the Converse Art Gallery, which is, to this date, the biggest significant expansion to the museum, and this is where we do all of our rotating shows. Right now, it's been like a giant fridge where I've had to store everything that I had to take out of the main museum, so I'm excited to get that gallery back to what it does best, which is displaying all of our rotating exhibitions. And talk about other people I wish I knew in real life. The museum has had some incredibly dynamic leaders throughout the years, and this lady is one of them. It's also really interesting to note that at one point in the early 1900s, when Hannah Dodge became curator of the museum, every single person running the museum and running the art school was a woman. I find that very interesting and really fascinating, and I think that's going to become a topic of research for me in the near future. All of these teachers and leaders were women, and it's just something about that I find really, really fascinating. Hannah Dodge was married to a gentleman named Ozias Dodge, and Ozias Dodge did run the art school years prior, before his death, and the both of them, talk about vision, the both of them had such a vision for the museum, for the art school, for the community. They were so actively involved. They were the literal boots on the ground that got people literally engaged, whether it was beginning the early student art associations that exhibited artwork all throughout the museum, all throughout the community as well. But Hannah Dodge had such a vision for the museum. When she was appointed curator in 1926, I guarantee you the leadership at NFA had no idea what they were getting themselves into. I guarantee it. You know why? Because the year prior, her husband passed away. That was 1925. And in 1926, one of Hannah's good friends, I guess, was taking notice that she was a bit bored and really looking for something to do. And so she goes to her father, who just happens to be the chair of the NFA Board of Trustees, and says, "Dad, Hannah seems to have been struggling ever since her husband had passed away. Can we get her something to do here?" And they go, "All right, well, we need a curator, we need a curator, or we need someone to really look after the place. So maybe that could be something for her to do." And I can't say this for certain, but the vision I have in my head is they bring in Hannah Dodge as sort of not a curator, but more of a caretaker. Is that sort of making sense now? Maybe? Yeah, someone who could watch over the place, make sure nothing crazy happens. They had no idea what they were getting themselves into, hiring this lady, because this lady has vision, and this lady had an agenda for growing the museum like you wouldn't believe. From 1926 until the day she died on November 23rd, 1963, same day I think Kennedy was assassinated, she was curator of the museum. So we're talking about 40 years, the better part of almost 40 years she was there, and grew the collection from not just the plaster casts, but now a global collection of artwork from 5 different continents. That's all thanks to her. That's all thanks to her there. She is sitting in that same room where our administrative office is now. So if you look to the left, my office is right here, and she's sitting right in front of that fireplace that's still there to this day. So really, because of her and because of vision from people like her, the museum actually became a museum. And what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the building has actually had a lot of different names over the years. It was collectively known as the Slater Memorial, the Slater Memorial Building, the Slater Art Museum. But the word museum didn't really officially become part of the naming scheme until much later in its lifetime. Because again, we had museums, but we didn't really have museum studies programs. So there was a lot of guesswork and experimentation on what it meant to be a museum, what it would really meant to be a museum. And she grew the museum to become literally a museum, not just a sculpture gallery or a gallery that displayed just replicas. Because originally, the building was only supposed to display replicas of the casts. There really was no big master plan that would have called for displaying and interpreting original objects until Hannah Dodge came into the picture. And she was quite savvy and well connected too. One of my favorite stories about her time there was how she acquired the bulk of our collection of East Asian artifacts. She was good friends with another woman by the name of Emily Noyes Vanderpool. They both lived and knew each other in New York, and they were part of like the same type of social circle. So they were good friends. Emily Vanderpool actually has a lot of interesting connections to Connecticut. She lived in New York, but also would come back to Litchfield, where some of her family was descended from. In fact, she was the granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Colonel Benjamin Talmadge, George Washington's spy master during the American Revolution. So she has a lot of connections in Litchfield and in New York. And in fact, she was even, Mrs. Vanderpool was even a founding member of the Litchfield Historical Society. So split between Connecticut and New York, she had a lot of different things going on. And she took a big liking to collecting Asian artifacts. Never once traveled to Asia. Never once went to the region. But she knew what she liked, and she would purchase pieces and acquire them from people and sources in New York. She had plenty of access, and she had the money as well to do that. And I wish I should have included a picture of her apartment in Gramercy Park. It is like there's no inch of space available. Everything is on the walls, on a surface. It's incredible. I can't believe she fit this collection in her apartment. But in 1935, she called Hannah Dodge, and this was at 2 o'clock in the morning. I'm not even kidding you. And she said, Hannah, I'm paraphrasing here. Hannah, you remember my collection? You're familiar with my collection of East Asian artifacts and antiquities, right? Yeah, like, what are you calling me at 2 o'clock in the morning about it for, right? Well, she said, well, Emily Vanderpool then says, well, I've decided I want to donate everything to the museum. In fact, they're on a truck right now, and they should be at your door the next morning. Word to the wise. Don't ever do that to a museum nowadays. Someone might have a stroke, because we're talking about 1,000 pieces, upwards of about 1,000 individual artifacts, whether they be woodblock prints or pottery, you name it, she had it. So she was very good at getting things for the museum. What can I say? She was very, very good at that. This is a shot of the Converse Art Gallery here, and the only difference is there's no staircase here anymore. The stairs would take you downstairs into the Converse building where all the art classes used to be. But again, since the building has really changed a lot in terms of its function, those stairs aren't there anymore. It's a little sad, but yeah, those stairs are not there anymore. Anybody have any questions so far? Okay, very good. So that's the first half of the early history of the museum. And now I get to show you the really fun part about how we prepared and how we got to this restoration. I've got a lot of photos of behind the scenes too of all of the work in progress. And it looks even better than what you're seeing right now. Some of these pictures might be a few months old, but it really is starting to come together now. So again, we got here because we needed to do so. It's the original slate roof on the building. And what I found also fascinating is that you can't even get these same slates anymore. The quarry that they came from in Munson, Maine closed down in 1933. It went under during the Great Depression. So you literally can't get stone from that particular quarry anymore. And it's more than just replacing the roofing, the slates. It's actually a total reconstruction of some areas of the roofing system. Because underneath the slates, you've got layers, different layers of substrate. And over time, as it rains and snows, water is very good at seeping into cracks, and you can see this on the roads all the time. It freezes and then it splits. And over time, we suffer from quite a number of leaks because of this. And at 135 years old, the roof was at capacity. It had reached its lifespan. But some interesting facts here again. The tower rises over 150 feet. It might be the biggest spire in Norwich. I don't know if City Hall might be bigger. I'd have to double check that. But it's more than just replacing those slates. It's reconstructing what's underneath, as well as restoring all of the original copper detailing as well. Stephen Earle was incredibly discerning and incredibly specific on the materials he selected for the building. He sourced things from Massachusetts he could have gotten Connecticut, but in his opinion, it was better coming from Massachusetts. It was better quality. That's how discerning he was. A couple of other things here that I'll go over too is the decision was made to not just restore the roof with original slates, but we had to use all new slates. Because some slates might have been in good condition, others had reached their lifespan, and it was really disconcerting watching those guys with the big rakes on the roof taking down, you know, the stone. It's not supposed to turn to dust. That was really concerning, because that was plenty of proof of why we needed to do this. We also ended up replacing restoring the original eyebrow dormer windows here as well. And all of the copper gutters, flashing, and ornamental detailing, some of which had to be totally reconstructed from scratch because it had, when left to the elements for 135 years, anybody is gonna look a little bit faded, right? While we were closed during this time, I mentioned before, I'm a big picture person. I'm probably always going to be that way. So if we were going to be shut down for an extended period of time, I wanted to use this time as an opportunity to really look inward. This is part of museum philosophy that is really important to running an organization like this, because you have to be constantly looking at what you're doing and how you're doing it. And so over the months leading up to this shutdown, I put together, with the help of a number of different people, a whole strategic plan that we were going to implement during our shutdown. And that included launching a brand new mission statement, updating our collections management policies and collecting goals, looking at how we preserve the collection and how we can do that better, as well as improving the visitor experience. People go to museums for 3 reasons. Right? And all of you, I'm sure, have been to plenty of museums throughout your life. But people go to museums for 3 reasons. They go because they want to learn about something. There might be a topic of interest to them, or maybe it's something they want to learn a little bit more about. People will go because they want to be enriched, because they don't necessarily want to learn about something, but they might want to just sit in a room surrounded by all those beautiful Van Gogh paintings, because they feel personally enriched by that. And the third reason is a combination of the first 2. And so my ultimate goal with running this museum is I want people to come into Slater Museum and feel like they're entering a world-class art museum. We already have a world-class collection. That's half the battle right there. But now when you walk in, you're going to be greeted to a much different but also a familiar presence, because much of the same things are on display, but it's just going to look quite different. I'll share with you our new mission statement here. Slater Memorial Museum serves Norwich Free Academy and its community by fostering inquiry and exploration, celebrating the richness and diversity of the human experience by collecting, preserving, and interpreting a regional and global collection of art and material culture. Summed up, that is exactly what we do and how we do it. And one of the other things was I noticed that the mission statement of the museum hadn't been updated in about 20 years. That was time to take a look at that. Most good practices, you want to look every 5 years or so to make sure that the mission of your nonprofit, of your museum, is still satisfying what you want to accomplish. As we were debating a new mission statement, our committee also created a new vision statement for the museum. The mission is the what and the how, and the vision statement is the why. Why are we doing what we're doing? As a vital part of the NFA experience, the museum seeks to cultivate lifelong engagement with art and culture for students, visitors, and alumni, create an inclusive and inspiring learning environment, respect our foundations and traditions, promote innovation, curiosity, and creative thinking, and honor the impact of philanthropy within our community. So everything that we're doing as a museum, we're doing because of these foundations, these principles. And that's what I want everybody to be really crystal clear on when they come into Slater Museum, because we're more than just a museum on a high school campus. We are a local, regional, and national resource with a global collection of art from all over the world. Now here's the fun part. How did we prepare for this project? We spent the latter half of 2021 cleaning out spaces. Who's ever had to clean out an attic? Everybody should be raising their hands, yes. It's not fun. Well, maybe sometimes, but when you go up into an attic and you see there's probably 20, 30 years of accumulation, guess what? I had probably about 100 years of accumulation in this attic. And we had to get the attic cleaned so that the contractors can get up there and start laying down protective plastic to catch any dirt, dust, and debris from getting into the galleries. And at the same time, we had to preserve and protect the plaster casts, the collection that we couldn't move from the main galleries. So here's some images of that. These are images of the attic, and for a long, long time, the attic served as storage space for the museum. I sort of kind of cringe when I look at this, because this is like every museum's worst nightmare. And nowadays, if you don't have climate-controlled storage, and oh my goodness. But at the same time, you got to remember that the Mona Lisa has spent more time in the elements versus out of the elements. So artwork is very resilient. It is very resilient over the years, but now we have a climate control storage vault that was built in 2012 with the atrium. So that's a big, big plus for us. So we combed through all of these, and trust me, there was a lot of stuff still left up there. Not just artifacts, but just, again, accumulation. Here's some other storage cubbies, and you'll see some of the sheathing here on the inside with the roof outside here. That's all water damage. That's all years of leaks happening here and there. Here's some more stuff upstairs, and I tell you, everything that we found, we had to look on every square inch of every object we find, because what are we looking for? I'm looking for a number, because if there's a number on it, that's an artifact. That means it's part of the collection. You can't just throw things away. Yeah?
In cleaning out the attic, what was the biggest surprise that you and your colleagues?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, because that slide is coming up. So stay tuned. Here's the loft space. This is directly above the cast gallery. The other thing one thing that surprised me was they didn't throw anything out. I'm serious. They did not throw anything out. You see these? Those are all interior shutters to the windows. And it's not just I got 4 other big piles right there too. I've got a couple other piles you can't really see back here. They didn't throw anything out. They kept all of the building fixtures. See these? Those are windows. Those are all original window sashes to the building. The building had windows replaced some time ago, but those are all original windows. These are just broken picture frames. I wish those were more interesting. That's what it looks like now. This protective plastic was laid down to catch any dirt, dust, or particulate that certainly was generated during the construction process. But this helped greatly. It was an excellent mitigator of all of that dirt, dust, and particulate from getting into the galleries. Here's another shot of the attic. Now it's mostly cleaned out, mostly all hollowed out now. And here's that big surprise that I'm talking about. It's coming up in the next slide. All that water damage right there. That was the biggest problem that we had to face throughout the years. Because you can replace slates, you can repair out the outside, but it's what's on the inside that really has suffered throughout the years. And that, thankfully, this is not above the cast gallery. Yes?
Did you have mold problems?
Believe it or not, no. The humidity levels remain surprisingly stable within the main galleries. It's the temperature. The temperature is really the biggest problem. Good question. So what did we find while cleaning? Because, come on, out of 100 years of accumulation, you're bound to find something, right? So did we find any hidden treasures? Did we find any gold, silver, or stacks of money? Did we find any of the missing paintings from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum? Spoiler alert, no. We found nothing. and I say that tongue in cheek, but I was really hoping to find that long lost treasure. I found nothing. I found absolutely nothing. I found something that had Picasso on it. It was a poster. I'm like, come on, why did you save this? This is not worth anything. I found nothing. But we did find some things that had clearly been forgotten about for a long time. This is Converse Gallery right now. Remember how I said it's like the big ice cooler now where I had to store everything. These are all object pedestals. These are all, again, building fixtures and artifacts that hadn't made it out of the attic yet. That was a painting I found upstairs in the attic. I'll tell you this real quick. This is a great story. You can't really see it too well, but this big painting you see here, it was by a Lithuanian artist. And I'm, sorry? Someone had a question? Oh, okay. So by a Lithuanian artist, and we don't have any other examples of Lithuanian art in our collection. Come to find out, they tried to deaccession the painting some time ago, but they didn't get permission initially because apparently this painting was bought from funds from another organization in New York, and that creates a lot of layers of complexity. But in the end, I ended up revisiting deaccessioning the piece because it didn't really fit anything. It didn't relate to anything else in the collection, so it was a very hard piece to interpret. Contacted the Academy of Arts and Letters in New York. That's the organization that sponsored purchasing the painting, and I explained to them the situation. They were very nice. They were very nice to deal with, and ultimately they granted us permission, saying if you do want to deaccession the piece, we give you that permission. This is very important, though. When a museum deaccessions a piece, meaning they want to remove it from the collection, you either have to give it to another museum, rehome it in a different museum, or you have to sell it at public auction. You have to have transparency, because otherwise you run into a major ethical dilemma with the American Alliance of Museums. There's a lot of guidelines and regulations you have to follow when it comes to deaccessioning and selling objects. So those are the two scenarios that you have. Well, the Academy of Arts and Letters in New York were instrumental. They got me in touch with the lady who runs, get this, the Balzikas Museum of Lithuanian Culture in Chicago. There's a museum for everything out there. You can't make this up. And she called me up and said, I understand you have such a painting by this artist. She knew the artist. They had a whole collection of his artwork. She says, you're looking to deaccession this piece? I said, yeah, that's what we were looking into. And this woman drove a U-Haul all the way from Chicago to Norwich, picked up the painting, and left. They wanted this painting that bad. It's going to go on exhibit. They're apparently doing a whole exhibit featuring this artist. And I have never seen anyone in my entire life be more excited to get a painting like this. It was so gratifying. It was really a nice moment, because that's a great way of museums supporting other museums. If you deaccession a piece, you might not send it to auction. It might be better off rehoming it in another museum. So we've rehomed pieces at the Fairfield University Art Museum. We gave a collection of sculptures that were all duplicates to the Lime Academy of Fine Arts. They were thrilled with that. So it's been a great saga to really look inward and see what parts of the collection just are not serving our mission anymore, and those objects are better served somewhere else. So it's been a really fun process, to say the least. Here's some neat things I found. Can you tell what these are? Yeah, those are all easels. Those are original easels to the Norwich Art School from 1890. I found pictures of those easels being used by art students, and they were tucked away under like a hidden eave of the roof structure. I didn't even find them. One of our facilities guys crawled into the eave wondering what was on the other side, and he found a whole stack of those easels. They probably packed them up, put them there. They never went back. They probably sat for 100 years. Incredible. Found some original unused slates, as well as beautiful steam whistles from milk complexes. Really cool stuff. And here's another thing. We removed a shelving unit covering this section of wall. It's a door. It's a hidden door. Who knows when the last time this door was open? You want to see what's on the other side? Yeah. Graffiti. Now, some of you might know these people because they were art students and they went to NFA. So if you have any clue as to who they are, please direct them my way.
Actually, Rosenstrike is very famous.
Yep. Okay.
He was killed in Vietnam about 3 weeks after he arrived there.
Really?
But
Wow.
he went to the Rensselaer and is known for his woodworking.
I'll be darned. I had guessed that these students had to have been art students, or at least most of them. In fact, let me go to the next slide here. Crab Kelly, found out who he is. He was an art student, also an athlete, if I remember correctly. Kinney, we found out him. Tom Ham was another art student, found out who he was. I actually don't know if any of these folks are still in the area, or even if they're still with us, but I'd be excited to meet them. I'd be very excited to meet them and say, how dare you deface my museum? No, I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that. All sorts of graffiti. This is right over the Sears Gallery, which was the library space. So they painted their names all on the beams. Really cool stuff. Here's some more images of how we preserved and protect the collection. We had to empty out every room in the museum, and boy, that was quite a task. These are what the galleries looked like when we emptied them all out. There's me with a hammer, pretending like I know how to make something, or I don't know. They said, hey, we want to take a picture of you, so there's me. Now, you're probably familiar with this view of the cast gallery, and the casts will still stay where they are, which is great. But I have some images here of the protection of the casts. Every single one of these casts had to be covered with plastic to protect them from any at all dirt, dust, or particulate that may have been generated. So the folks from Crocker Architectural, our contractors, came in and covered every single piece. Took them 2 days. They spent at least 2 full days covering everything. It's kind of creepy, actually, walking through the gallery, and there's all these figures that are covered in sheets. They look like ghosts. It's kind of scary. I'm like expecting one of them to move. They look like mummies, like wrapped up. They're a little foreboding, if you will. Here's the covering of Nike of Paonios, the biggest one that we've got in there. They had to set up staging in order to get at it from the top. That was hard. That was tough to watch. Yep, there it is now, all covered up. They had to get those right above where it leads you to our office spaces. That's the back area there that takes you to our offices. And here's something that was great. This, again, not just restoration of the roof, but it was also a big opportunity to conduct another conservation project, which were the stained glass windows. Thanks to a big, generous gift from the NFA class of 1972 and a number of other donors, we were able to conserve our original stained glass double-hung windows in the museum. And you'll see, this was also very badly needed. So the folks from Yankee Remodeler out of New London came down to do this job. Shout out to them, right? They were fabulous. They were so good. They came in, set up staging inside, and got all those windows out. They're not Tiffany windows. That's a common question I get. Tiffany was from Norwich. He did a lot of work there, but to our knowledge, they're not Tiffany, unfortunately. Some more shots of them taking the windows out. I was sweating like a pig watching these irreplaceable windows, as well as our irreplaceable cast be covered, but not a single lick of damage. They were really a joy to work with. They had to make these custom crates. They took them down to their studio in New London where they were all reglazed, and they had to repair one broken pane, but that was it. Yeah, this is the outside. You see that? That's all the glazing and all that literally falling right out of the panes there. Here's some other close-ups. And what ended up happening was, well, at least our best guess as to what happened was the last time these windows were reglazed, it wasn't done properly. They didn't allow it to cure before installing them back in. They need about 4 to 6 weeks for the compound to really cure. And if you don't allow it that time and just put the windows back, it's going to crumble. What's supposed to last 30 to 40 years is going to probably last you about 8 to 10 years. So that's really what we think ended up with this case here. You could just pick it right off. I'm shocked they didn't even come out of I'm shocked the glass survived. And fortunately, the lead was in good shape too. They didn't have to do any extensive work there. They reglazed everything, and there was one existing broken panel that they fixed and did a fantastic job. We sanded and refinished all the floors upstairs, and I don't think they had been touched since they were laid down. They were black. They were so. I wish I had a before picture to show you. But we restored the mezzanine wooden floors back to their original glory. And right now I'm having the downstairs floors refinished too, so they'll match. They'll match nicely. New exhibition experiences. So this is something, again, that hails back to what Henry Watson Kent talked about when it came to museums. He was so forward-thinking in making sure that Slater Museum had a regular set of rotating exhibitions, because you need a reason for people to keep coming back, right? There's a reason why we go back and visit museums like the Met, like the MFA, because they give you a reason. They don't just have the permanent collection, but they have other shows that bring you in, that you can engage with. And that's the philosophy I'm trying to keep in mind here when we redesign these spaces. I want the spaces to feel so familiar, but so new at the same time. So in the plaster cast gallery, we're actually going back to, we're doing a bit of a return to form with this gallery. The casts have changed positions a lot throughout the years, and they can be moved. I know, because I moved them. And I will take credit for that. They were very we only moved about maybe 12 in addition to a row of busts. But they're all hollow on the inside, so they're not as heavy as they look. And in fact, some of the big ones are on wheels, which is even better. So you could wheel them to different parts of the gallery. We painted every single base of the cast, so now they're a brand new color. It's called Peach Fuzz. I love the names for these colors that they come up with. So we painted a new color scheme on the bases to be a bit of a brighter color, so that when you walk in, it really complements the warmth of the casts and the warmth of the wooden floors. And this is what the color scheme looks like now. Before, these walls were really bright red, and it was a lot of red in a room that's all brick and wood. So we've painted a brand new color behind here. This is a dark gray with some blue undertones to it. So it pairs nicely with the peach that has some orangey undertones to it. They really complement each other nicely. But this is the new color scheme that you'll see when you walk into the gallery. This was done a few months ago, so there's other things here that I haven't seen yet. But I can't show you everything because I need a reason for you to come to visit the place, and without me just showing it to you. So this was a couple months old now, and the casts pop so nicely up against that dark wall. The Sears Gallery here, this used to be the library, is going to be the new semi-permanent home of the museum's 19th century collection of painting and sculpture. And the exhibition is going to be called the Norwich Masterpieces. Artwork by John Dennison Crocker, Alexander Emmons, and our signature painting by artist John Trumbull. Familiar with John Trumbull? If you go down to the Capitol building, you go into the rotunda and you'll see big, big paintings of the American Revolution. That's John Trumbull. He was from Lebanon, Connecticut. His in-laws were the Huntington family of Norwich, and he painted extensively throughout this region. And historically speaking, it's one of our most significant works is John Trumbull's Yantic Falls, right at Uncas Leap. I'm sure a number of you have been there. We have one of those paintings he did. Yale has the other. And it's not even on display either. It's like, come on, guys. Anyway. But that painting specifically was conserved in 2019, and it didn't end up going back on display. So since the pandemic, it hasn't been on display. But we got a brand new gold frame for it, and it will be on display when we reopen. So that's going to be in this gallery here. We opened up the whole gallery space, removed the interior walls to make it feel like a grand art gallery as you walk in. You can see one end of the room to the other and really appreciate the stunning architecture of the building. That's the other thing I was keeping in mind too, is I want the displays to really respect the architecture of the building, because you can't get architecture like this anymore. They don't build buildings like this anymore. And I'm going to give you a sneak peek of what the room is going to look like now. We have a couple casts here, as well as these lovely individuals, John Hunt Adams and his wife, right next to him. We laid brand new carpeting down. Let me go back here. This is red. Now it's gray. And it totally changes the vibe. It's the same design, just a different color. And it really, really makes the room feel so much more open and so much more inviting. I'm loving how this room is coming out so far. We're renovating other galleries to feature local legends and regional excellence in artwork. So this gallery here will be the new home of our collection of paintings by Ellis Ruley. Does that name ring a bell? Ellis Ruley, yep. When he died in 1959, Ellis Ruley, who was an African-American artist, for those that may not be familiar, I'm willing to bet a lot of money that Ellis Ruley would never have expected his paintings to end up in a museum. And Slater Museum is now the proud owner of 5 of Ellis Ruley's paintings. Since 1984, we had 1, and over the past 4 years, we added 4 more. And I'm really excited. That was my first big acquisition, was an Ellis Ruley painting. Those are all gonna be on this wall here. And moving forward, Ellis Ruley is going to be a permanent, visible fixture of the museum, because ever since the Ellis Ruley Committee had formed and established a park at his former homestead in 2018, we had a retrospective of his of his paintings in 2018 as well. His profile is steadily growing. The Smithsonian is after his pieces. And they have, I believe, 3 in their collection, which means we're beating them. I don't like to brag a lot about it, but I will brag about that. I will brag about beating the Smithsonian. But we're still actively seeking out Ellis Ruley paintings as well. And the committee estimated there's probably 65 paintings that exist, known examples that exist. That's not a lot. You know how many Van Gogh paintings there are out there? About 2,000. It just gives you something to think about. This gallery will be a maritime gallery talking about the building of the USS Confederacy, which was a Revolutionary War frigate built in Norwich. This gallery will talk about the building of that ship, as well as talking about shipbuilding in Norwich during the 18th century. It's a topic that's very close to my heart as well, because before Slater Museum, I spent 6 lovely years at Mystic Seaport. So maritime history is very much in my blood. And it wasn't by choice. I mean, I needed a job, and they were willing to hire me. So, I got to spend a lot of great time at Mystic Seaport, and ended up writing a scholarly article about the Confederacy. So this is a topic that's very important to me, and we have 2 beautiful models of that ship that will be on display. Our collection of Asian art, all those pieces owned by Mrs. Vanderpoel, this will be in an exhibition called The Scholar and the Samurai. And it's a look at the museum's collection of Japanese woodblock prints, as well as Chinese works on paper as well. So we'll have works on paper and some 3D objects as well. We're just about at the end here. I want to make sure I don't go over time by too much. You've been very patient. I appreciate your attention here. Our African gallery here is getting a little bit of a facelift, so the African masks are coming back to the forefront a bit. And we've also opened this space up too by taking away and relocating exhibit cases as well. So this gallery is coming together quite nicely. I like how this one's coming out. New acquisitions. These are some things you'll be able to see when we reopen. Here's that Ellis Ruley painting that we acquired in fall of 2021. It's called Autumn on the Farm. This was one of his neighbor's houses on the east side of Norwich near Hammond Avenue. He painted this scene. Came all the way from Arizona. that was a story, because when you're having a painting being shipped across the country, I didn't sleep that whole week, because I'm like, I need this painting to get here undamaged, and it did. It arrived safe and sound. Here's some other lovely additions to the collection. This over here, it will be on display. Her name is The Bather. She was on display in 2017 when we did an exhibition on the artist, Bela Pratt. Bela Pratt was another Norwich guy, and he was a nationally renowned artist. So this just came to us from Bela Pratt's grandson, who's still living. I've become quite nice friends with him, and it's the first time this piece has left the family since 1903, when it was first made. So very, very important piece for us. We've got a couple of new casts that are on display too. You might recognize this face over here. Who's that? Nefertiti, yes. Nefertiti, yep. The original is in Berlin. And we just added this cast. It's a cast of the original Nefertiti, and this was created by Skylight Studios up in Boston. They're the casting studio that we work with, and they inherited the collection that built Slater's collection. They still have a lot of the original molds that were used to make Slater's casts. So we're still trying to enhance the cast collection. Again, how can we showcase new things in an exhibit that's over 135 years old? We can add new pieces like this, and this lady right here. You know where we found her? In the attic. In the attic. Do you know who she is? Anybody recognize her? We don't know who she is. I have no idea who she is. She has a number. She has a number, and when I type in the number, when I look for that record card, it says, unidentified African American woman. I have no idea who she is, but guess what? She's someone. Because she's a cast, meaning something had to exist to make the molds that created the copy. I have no idea who she is. I have no idea. So the panel next to her is going to be essentially is going to be an interpretive panel that says, who might this be? When you look at this person, who do you think this person could be? What does her expression tell you? What does it tell you about the artist that made her? Those are the types of questions that I want people to ask themselves when they go into a space like this. Here's another lovely acquisition we got. Her name's Julia Foster Ward of Hartford, Connecticut. She died around 1878 or so, and this was by artist Daniel Huntington. This was a first for our collection. Daniel Huntington was a big Hudson River School artist, and we didn't have any of his pieces in the collection until now. This was a piece we purchased at auction. Originally deaccessioned from the Wadsworth. It used to be in their collection, I think, since the 1950s. But we're very happy to get it, and she'll be on display too. This gallery will be an exhibition on Connecticut artists, focusing on how artists use color. Here's another look at that Confederacy gallery, the two ship models there. These pictures are about a couple months old. This gallery is much more put together now. A couple of other views there. Here's another view of the African gallery. Again, it's not necessarily about what's on display, but how it's displayed. And how you display something is so important. It's just as important as the object itself. So we've got more casts going into the African gallery here that are casts of African pieces or Middle Eastern pieces. So this will be housed in the African gallery. We're setting up a new room here that's going to be a period style room, circa early 1900s. It's going to tell you early history of the Norwich Art School, as well as art school director Ozias Dodge. So we're calling it the Ozias Dodge Drawing Room. Drawing room has a bit of a double entendre to it because Ozias Dodge was an artist. He was a professional. He was a sketcher. He drew. So it's a drawing room in dedication to him as an artist, but also as a drawing room to draw people into the space. So kind of a neat expression. I did not come up with that name. That was courtesy of my staff members, Jen and Katie. They came up with that concept. I thought that was such a cool idea. Here's some money shots. We're just about done. So here's some money shots here of the weather vane going back on the Slater roof. It's the original weather vane. There are the guys on the turret. You're at about over 100 feet in the air. Anybody ever been up that high on scaffolding in 30-mile-an-hour winds? Yeah, yeah. It's a bit shaky. There's the weather vane. Yeah. And it looks a lot, and I don't know if Stephen Earle did this on purpose. It looks like a harpoon. Doesn't it look like a harpoon? It looks almost like a harpoon. When I saw it up close for the first time, I went, this looks just like a harpoon. It's incredible. Oh, there it is. Excuse me. Go back to that. So the original weather vane here, this is SM, Slater Memorial, not Slater Museum, Slater Memorial, okay? It was gold-leafed. They actually gold-leafed it. And we decided not to gold leaf it again, mostly because the gold leaf it was all gone. There were still some traces left, but it was gold leaf, but we gold painted it instead, so that it still reflects the original character. There's some other shots of the guys up there. The tower was the toughest part. And they did that first. They started with the tower first and then worked their way back. So this was the toughest part to do. So the methodology was you start with the toughest, then work your way back. Yes? Did the masonry require a lot of restoration? No, in fact, the masonry was restored probably 15 years ago. And since then, it has held up very nicely. Good question.